More than 30 people killed in a gas explosion at a restaurant in Ningxia on the mainland. Time is running out in the hunt for the missing Titanic tourist submersible. And Premier Li Qiang arrives in France for a visit. Good evening and welcome to TVB News. An explosion at a barbecue restaurant last night in the northwestern region of Ningxia on the mainland left 31 people dead and 7 others injured. Authorities have arrested 9 people, including the proprietor of the restaurant. President Xi Jinping has called for all-out rescue efforts and ordered a safety overhaul across the country. The blast tore through the restaurant during peak dining hours, with many people inside. The owner of a nearby business spoke to Henan television. The person talked about hearing a gas explosion just minutes before a natural gas pipeline exploded. The explosion created a big hole in a wall on the second floor. President Xi Jinping demanded urgent medical care for the injured and a safety overhaul across the country. He called for efforts to quickly determine the cause of the blast and take action against those responsible for the tragedy. Xi also said authorities should address all types of risks and hidden dangers and launch campaigns to promote workplace safety. The severity of the explosion is still apparent one day after the incident, with the restaurant still cordoned off. Authorities have moved about 60 area residents to a hotel. Identification of the victims is still underway. An operation ban is in place for all eateries using liquefied petroleum gas. Mainland media said the type of LPG cylinder used by the restaurant in question is common among restaurants there. That's because businesses cannot afford the hefty charges for gas pipelines. Meanwhile, those who replace gas valves on their own are considered to have breached the law, as only properly trained personnel can handle the job well. Here in Hong Kong, the leakage of LPG also caused an explosion at a restaurant in To Kwa Wan a few years ago, causing 4 injuries. An expert gave his take on what to do when an odd smell is detected before a possible gas leakage.
If we cannot confirm the area, let's close the main supply valve first. This will reduce the leakage rate in the pipeline or elsewhere. When the gas is leaking to a certain percentage, when there is an oxygen and the ignition sources like heater or fire, then it will automatically generate fire and explosion.
The search for the missing Titanic tourist submersible in the North Atlantic turned critical today as oxygen supply was expected to run out at 7:08 p.m. Hong Kong time. More ships and vessels were deployed to the site of the disappearance, described as twice the size of Connecticut. Tracy Furness has more.
Teams from the United States, Canada and France, using planes and ships, are scouring more than 25,900 square kilometers of open sea. With the air supply on board the submersible Titan due to run out at 7:08 p.m. Hong Kong time on Thursday, rescuers are desperately searching the surface and subsurface for the vessel. Rescuers concentrated their search Wednesday in a remote area of the North Atlantic where undersea noises had been detected. Friend and fellow explorer of missing Titan passenger Paul-Henri Nargelet is optimistic by the noises.
If it's really ever 30 minutes, I wonder how many times that repetitions that has happened. I would assume more than twice. Well, the ocean's full of surprises, so you never know. But I can't think of anything that would be that every 30 minutes. And I do know that P.H. Nargelet would do something like that. To keep so that people know that they're there.
But rescuers have warned that those who express optimism must understand many obstacles remain.
This is an incredibly complex search operation requiring both surface and subsurface elements, and our unified approach is critical. The location of the search, 900 miles east of Cape Cod and 400 miles southeast of St. John's, makes it exceptionally difficult to mobilize large amounts of equipment quickly. In spite of those challenges, we've been able to provide continuous air and surface search assets, as well as additional ROV capability to search below the surface. We currently have 5 surface assets searching for the Titan, and we expect 10 total surface assets to search in the next 24 to 48 hours.
Meanwhile, a French institution sent a robot submersible Wednesday capable of reaching depths of 6,000 meters. The deep-sea diving robot, Victor 6000, was dispatched to the area of the Titanic by request of the US Navy. It is the only vessel capable of reaching those depths, and it's operated by a 25-strong crew on board a nearby ship, working 24 hours a day as they race against the clock. Tracy Furness, TVB News.
Premier Li Qiang said China and France should jointly maintain the security and stability of global industrial and supply chains, strengthen cooperation on innovation, and foster a sound business environment. Li made the 3-point proposal when delivering a speech at a dinner with the Chinese and French business communities in Paris. Li also welcomed French enterprises to actively participate in the China International Import Expo to further explore the Chinese market. He encouraged entrepreneurs from both countries to make joint efforts to promote long-term cooperation between China and France and between China and Europe. Li arrived in Paris after paying an official visit to Germany. He's expected to meet French President Emmanuel Macron and hold talks with French Prime Minister Elisabeth Borne. In France, around 50 people have been injured after a powerful blast brought down a building on Paris's left bank. 6 of the people are in critical condition after suffering severe burns. Emergency workers searched through the wreckage, and 1 person is still thought to be missing. The explosion happened Wednesday afternoon. It tore through Rue Saint-Jacques, which runs from Notre Dame to Sorbonne University. The blast destroyed the facade of a building housing a design school popular with foreign students. Witnesses described a deafening explosion and a giant fireball that rose several stories high. The Paris prosecutor's office said it's early to say what caused the blast, with a possible gas leak being one of the potential causes. Ukraine has launched a successful attack on a key bridge linking Russian-held parts of the Kherson region with the Crimean Peninsula. But President Volodymyr Zelensky admits the counteroffensive is moving at a slow pace, adding that this is not a Hollywood movie and people should not expect immediate results. David Garrett reports.
Craters in the Chonhar Bridge, a major thoroughfare between Crimea and Kherson in mainland Ukraine. Russian-appointed head of the region, Vladimir Saldo, surveys the damage. Known as the Gate to Crimea, it's not clear when traffic can resume. Saldo says no one was injured. Russia continues to launch its rockets. People were injured in the eastern city of Pokrovsk, north of Donetsk. This attack on the front line hit civilian houses. Natalia, who is nearly 70, was with her 14-year-old granddaughter when the missile hit her house and that of her neighbour. Igor assesses the damage to his home. There is debris from blown-out doors and windows. He asks why Putin is doing this. Igor says he would like to strangle Putin. These shots from Russian state television show the fighting on the front line. The Russian military is said to be pushing back Ukraine forces. Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky admitted things are moving slower than he had hoped. In an interview with the BBC, he tried to manage expectations. He was quoted as saying, "Some people believe this is a Hollywood movie and expect results now. It's not. What's at stake is people's lives." He focused on the positives in his nightly national address, saying, "In the south, we are destroying the enemy. In the Donetsk region, we are destroying the enemy. We have our movement forward." The United States has committed more financial aid to Ukraine. Secretary of State Antony Blinken speaking to a conference in London.
We will provide more than $1.3 billion in additional aid to help Ukraine toward that goal. We're going to invest over $520 million to help Ukraine overhaul its energy grid, more than half of which, as you've heard, has been destroyed by Russia.
Ukraine's energy minister has warned that Russia could shut off gas supplies to Europe within a year. EU countries have agreed on an 11th package of sanctions against Moscow. Russian President Vladimir Putin has repeatedly said the sanctions are doing little to dent his invasion. Speaking at a lavish graduation ceremony for cadets, he promised investment in the military and weapons. He says Ukraine's resistance has hit a lull. In an interview afterwards, he said Russian forces had destroyed 245 enemy tanks. He said French and American armoured vehicles all burning well. David Garrett, TVB News.
At a conference in London, Western nations pledged billions in US dollars for Ukraine to help rebuild the country. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says they may need more. Ukraine Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal said he hopes to secure around $7 billion in what has been described as the largest reconstruction project in Europe since World War II. Representatives from the US, Latvia, France and Germany spoke at the event. The UK hosted the event and Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says private companies, including Virgin, Philips and Hyundai, are among 400 firms from 38 countries that have committed to invest. At last year's recovery conference in Switzerland, Ukraine asked for frozen Russian assets to finance the rebuild, but that is still being discussed by Western powers. Zelensky spoke to the conference from Kiev, but he said it was not just about money. He says Ukraine needs help to modernize. A man was arrested and 2 people were hurt after a knife attack at a hospital in London. One of those harmed was left with life-threatening injuries. The Central Middlesex Hospital in the Park Royal area of northwest London had to be shut down. Patients described how they had to be locked in a room for their own safety as a man wielded a bladed weapon. The perpetrator also sustained injuries. Still to come on tonight's news. Joe Biden welcomes the Indian Prime Minister at the White House. Dragon Boat festivities in Hong Kong. And a woman arrested in Shamsher-Po on suspicion of animal cruelty. Welcome back to TVB News. US President Joe Biden and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi are expected to deepen defense and technology cooperation between their countries during Modi's official visit to the White House. That's despite lingering US concerns about human rights in India and New Delhi's ongoing ties with Russia amid Moscow's ongoing war in Ukraine. Daniel Rao tells us more.
US President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden welcomed Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the White House on Wednesday. India's leader is on his first trip to the US with the full diplomatic status of a state visit. Today, Biden and Modi will hold talks before delivering remarks and taking questions from journalists at a press conference. The event has been dubbed a big deal by White House National Security spokesperson John Kirby. That's because it's unusual for Modi to take questions from the media beyond occasional interviews. He has not addressed a single press conference in India since becoming Prime Minister about 9 years ago. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said Russia's ongoing war in Ukraine will be among the topics addressed. New Delhi has frustrated Washington by maintaining some defense and economic ties with Russia after the Kremlin launched an invasion of Ukraine. Still, Biden and Modi are expected to make announcements on the co-development and co-production of military systems, including some very advanced systems. This would mark an attempt by the US to encourage India to buy weapons from sources other than its traditional supplier, Russia. Human rights could be one topic of the press conference amid US concerns about democratic backsliding in India under Modi's Hindu nationalist Bharatiya Janata Party. India and US relations with China are also likely to be discussed. However, National Security Advisor Sullivan stressed Modi's visit is not about China, but Beijing's role in the global military, economic and technology domain. After the press conference, a state dinner will take place at the White House. On Friday, Modi will address US CEOs as American companies plan new investments in India. The Indian Prime Minister had held talks with leading business figures in New York, including Tesla CEO Elon Musk, prior to touching down in Washington, D.C. Dunarell, TVB News.
Here in Hong Kong, today marks the Dragon Boat Festival, where dragon boat tournaments made a comeback. Thousands flocked to Shatton and Aberdeen to party. In Stanley, over 5,000 athletes from 170 teams from Hong Kong and abroad took part in the race. Veronica Lin was there.
On the bustling beach in Stanley, thousands flocked to the shores to take part in this year's International Dragon Boat Championships. Even furry friends decided to join in on the fun. The heat definitely has not deterred their passion.
Very excited. Good team this year. We've been practicing in Stanley every Saturday, and then we've been doing some land training.
It's a great day. It's good to see, Hong Kong being back. We would get here every Saturday around about 11, and then we'll have a coach. We'll have a coach who leads us. They're really going through the motions, and then it's really just teaching us how to have the right technique and making us feel comfortable in the water.
Apart from physical strength, rhythm is key in winning dragon boat competitions.
Elsewhere, races and celebrations are also underway. The tournament in Aberdeen attracted a total of 45 teams, as well as dozens of photography enthusiasts capturing the athletes in action. Desmond said he's glad it's mask-free this time around, and the atmosphere is way better after the removal of pandemic restrictions. In Sha Tin, similar scenes could be seen, with both female and male athletes paddling hard on the Shimun River. Over in Tai Po, fishing communities dressed in costumes performed a traditional ritual, mimicking the movements of paddling in a boat. In Sai Kung, a reminder that the tournament is not only for those who are physically strong. Since 2007, the Neighborhood Advice Action Council have been hosting dragon boat races for volunteers and athletes who are disabled. That includes athletes with autism or mild intellectual disabilities who spend about 6 to 8 weeks training before the competition. So paddle on and spread the love. Fran Kalin, TVB News.
Chief Executive John Lee said legislation under Article 23 of the Basic Law must be carried out within this year or by next year at the latest. The city's leader laid out the timeline for the local security legislation in an interview with Hong Kong China News Agency. The administration has asked relevant bureaus to study similar legislation in other common law countries. Separate from the national security law, Article 23 stipulates the Hong Kong government shall enact laws on its own to prohibit any act of treason, secession and subversion against the central government. Lee said the national security law has been in place for nearly 3 years, but society is still witnessing undercurrents of attempts to damage the city, with some nations looking to suppress the country as well. He added there has been no change to one country, two systems principle, and what's changed is the government's course correction in helping Hong Kong take the right path ahead. The Amtia Corporation is earmarking $65 billion for rail repairs and maintenance work, but such efforts might affect service hours. It's understood the rail operator is considering adjusting train schedules only at weekends. Jackie Lin reports.
It's a $65 billion endeavor for the city's most used mode of public transport to minimize faults, breakdowns, and service disruptions. But temporary disruptions could arise for maintenance needs. For instance, the first train might be delayed or the last train departing earlier. This man says the impact should be minimal, especially on non-work days, and upkeep efforts are key to prevent major mishaps. This man meanwhile finds the rail operator's decision disruptive to the public, adding that the original service hours should have considered the required overnight maintenance time. Lawmaker Ben Chan, who chairs the Legislative Council's Transport Panel, asked the MTR Corporation about the matter. He's told that service hour adjustments won't take place throughout the week, similar to the arrangements back in 2021 during the construction of the East Rail Line Cross Harbour extension. Chan said shortened service hours would likely fall on weekends or during long holidays. So the Hong Kong Federation of Railway Trade points out time is limited for maintenance work.
After the last train departs, we still have to wait for another train to pass through. So there are only around 2 hours for us to carry out maintenance work. It's much better if MTR can adjust the working hour.
He added for some stations which are far from each other, such as those along Tung Chung Line, workers have to walk along the tracks for overnight maintenance. He hopes the rail giant could come up with plans or introduce technology to save time and streamline such procedures. Jackie Lin, TVB News.
Police arrested a woman in Sham Shui Po on suspicion of animal cruelty. Staff members of the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals and Agriculture, Fisheries and Conservation Department took away some 14 cats in batches from a residential building on Fuk Wah Street. That's after police received report this morning over suspected water leakage and foul odor at a unit. The cats were found inside the cluttered apartment with insufficient water and food, but not in a life-threatening situation. A 43-year-old tenant was later arrested. That's the news. Thanks for watching.